look at a guy like Mirko Cro Cop, who's a perfect example. Even at the point in time where Mirko Cro Cop was considered part of the big three in Pride, with him, Nogueira, and Emelianenko, he still lost to Kevin Randleman. He still lost to Mark Hunt. Came to the UFC, and although he's sort of, on the downside of his career, still lost to Czech Congo, Gabriel Gonzaga. Gabriel Gonzaga himself is a brilliant example of the kind of wild fluctuation that you can have in the heavyweight division. So I would say that, yeah, absolutely, the heavyweight division is much better now, and I think with guys like Kane, like Dos Santos, we're going to see a greater level of stability because, frankly, we have better fighters now. But still, historically, it's much less to be a top heavyweight. To be considered a top lightweight or a top welterweight, you really have to go out and beat some of your best contemporaries because the competition, there's more guys, there's more talented guys, and the competition is a whole lot more intense, whereas in the heavyweight division, the guys are generally more flawed, so there's a chance that you'll just beat a top 10 guy and turn in an okay performance and be seen as great. Far greater, which is how we get weird anomalies like Czech Congos and Gabriel Gonzagas and Brett Rogers of the world.
Right on. Quick question. Sherdog's been getting a lot of publicity in a certain video blogger. I'm sure you heard of Bloodstained Lane. What do you think of him?
He seems to amuse the people who are big fans of him, so that's good. I think in general, I don't like the shtick. I think the weightlifting blood kind of went out with Andrew Dice Clay, but I do think there's something to be said for someone who is a big MMA fan, a big K1 fan, a big boxing fan, popularizing those things. If someone's a Bloodstained Lane fan, maybe they're not a boxing fan, they read his tweets about boxing or whatever, I think that's beneficial in general. Like, I think it's not my cup of tea, but and I think also I would say that I think it represents a lot of things that I find that are bad about new media, but at the same time, I like the content involved. The fact that Bloodstained Lane's someone that likes all sort of pride fighting and really champions it, viciously, I think that's fantastic. If someone likes Bloodstained Lane's videos and follows his Twitter and finds out, something about, the bantamweight boxing series coming up on Showtime, I think in general that's a beneficial thing.
Right on. Eric, go ahead.
No, I'm pretty good, man. We summed it up there, man, with all these questions, man. You pretty much answered it, man. So I'm pretty good at answering questions. If you want to ask him another question, ask Jordan another question, man. He summed it up for me.
All right, Jordan, before we let you go, quick question. I was listening to your show when actually a buddy of mine called in about Brock Lesnar. You seem to be a very kind of pro Brock Lesnar fan, and I have respect for anybody who gets in the cage and stuff, but not Brock Lesnar. Not really. I think he's a product of the UFC hype machine. I think a lot of people feel the exact same way. What's your defense of Brock Lesnar?
I don't know that Brock Lesnar needs any kind of defense from me. I think in general, anytime anyone loses, the reaction to them losing is going to be over the top, especially if it's one-sided. Anyone who loses in a one-sided fashion in MMA will be deemed completely irrelevant and useless, and they're a horrible, no-good person that's not fit to go on living, let alone fighting. But I don't know that Lesnar needs any defense from me. He beat up Randy Couture, he beat up Frank Mir, he beat Shane Carlin. I mean, I don't think that someone who's been able to go and do those kind of things need any defense from me. I don't think that he is, some kind of supernova of a heavyweight. We saw that against Cain Velasquez, I thought, 18 months ago, that Cain Velasquez would probably beat him up. I mean, he's just a better heavyweight. But that doesn't mean that Brock Lesnar isn't someone who could be, or, isn't still a relevant heavyweight. He's not the best heavyweight in the world. I don't think that he can just go back to the drawing board and cracks away to beat Cain Velasquez. But also, I don't think he needs any kind of polemic defense from me or from anyone else. Since the charge being levied against him, a defense suggests to me that there is a credible charge against you. And Brock Lesnar is a no-good, horrible guy who really sucks at fighting, but somehow managed to beat a bunch of the top 10 heavyweights. That isn't a just charge, and so I don't know that any kind of defense is warranted.
Right. I understand where you're coming from, but see, here's the thing. Like I said, on the forums, and not just, Bloodstained Lane's friends or any of these very critical Zuffa, quote-unquote, characters, a lot of people have been saying that he isn't fighting the best guys. I mean, Keith Haring, Or Randy Couture when he's 45. Like, yeah, he beat up Randy Couture, but Randy Couture is 45, and he's now talking about hanging up his gloves. And Shane Carwin gassed. If Shane Carwin didn't gas, and a lot of people were arguing that that fight should have been stopped in the first round, something I personally don't agree with, but that's something that people were saying. He hasn't really fought anybody, and besides Zuffer trying to make money off him, I really don't see how he's a credible threat or even a top 10 heavyweight. That's me personally.
Well, you can't say if a guy didn't beat all these guys, he wouldn't be a top 10 heavyweight. If Anderson Silva didn't beat all these guys, or George St. Pierre didn't beat all these guys, that's kind of like what we ask guys to do, go out and fight other guys and beat them. That said, Randy Couture wasn't that long removed from beating Tim Sylvia and Gabriel Gonzaga, guys that were considered top 10 heavyweights at the time. And one of those guys who, by the way, is one of the important pillars in constructing the idea that Fedor Emelianenko has any kind of resume worth a damn. If you're going to say that, Fedor Emelianenko is unjustly dropped from the pound-for-pound list, one of the only decent fighters he's beaten in the last 4 or 5 years was Randy Couture's sloppy seconds. What does that say for him? As for Frank Mir, a guy that I don't think is a great heavyweight, but is still a perennial top 10 heavyweight, again, perhaps speaking to the volatility of the division. And Shane Carwin beat him up pretty bad, then gassed out, but that's part of MMA. It's not a marathon, but it's not a sprint either. If you can't finish the fight, you lost.
Yeah,
I mean, if we went back and looked at every time a guy had a great opening round and then failed, it would probably be a drastically different sport.
Now, let me ask you something. I get what you're saying. Okay, how about this? Todd Duffy was beating the crap out of Mike Russo for 2.5 rounds, got caught on the chin and got knocked out. Would you actually say that Mike Russo is a better MMA fighter and should rank higher than Todd Duffy?
I don't know that he's a better MMA fighter. He should definitely rank higher because he did the only thing that we care about in fighting. He won.
Right.
All we have in fighting is whether or not your hand got raised or didn't. That's really the only margin. We care about people who win, and because that's what it takes. If you're being asked to knock out your opponent, it's a perfectly justifiable thing to get beat up and come back. Antonio Rodriguez Nogueira is the second greatest heavyweight ever, probably, and his entire career was built on getting absolutely stomped on and submitting people. And we celebrate him for it. It's great. Part of the lore of Minotauro. It's what makes him a special athlete. And so to deny Mike Russo that simply because, he's a bit fat and isn't the most athletic guy in the world, really. I mean, there's lots of examples of sort of people snatching victory from their jaws of defeat. Julio Cesar Chavez is a great all-time boxer, and he beat Melzer Taylor. Did Melzer Taylor get ripped off with 2 seconds left on the clock? Maybe, but the only objective fact we have is whether someone won or whether they lost, and that's what we count at the end of the day. I mean, no one looks at the Super Bowl and goes, the 16-0 or 17-0, 18-0 Patriots, they were really a lot better than the Giants, but the Giants got that catch at the end. It was pretty lucky. We just know that the Giants won the Super Bowl. That's what we ask. Did you win the sporting event?
Yeah, I'm still very bitter about that game. But now, one last question before I let you go, man. Now that Brock has been beaten by Cain Velasquez, who I knew all along would beat him, I had really no doubt in my mind. Brock Lesnar is still number 2 on the Sherdog heavyweight rankings. Do you personally agree with that, being ahead of Fabricio Verdum, who beat Fedor, who's considered one of the greatest, if not the greatest, mixed martial artists of all time, and especially in the heavyweight division?
Yeah, it's fine by me. I mean, I think their resumes are fairly comparable. Brock's outstanding went to this point in time, Couture, Mir, and Carwin. And with Verdum, you have the recent win over Antonio Silva and the win over Fedor Emelianenko. I think they're fairly comparable. Historically, obviously, Fedor is something remarkable, but the incarnation of Fedor that Fabricio Verdum triumphed over, it's not like the 2005 one where Fedor had just beat strings of top 10 heavyweights. This is a guy who, as we mentioned, in the last 4 or 5 years, has basically beaten Silvio Arlovsky and Brett Rogers. And he did get plunked by Junior Sagano, and other than that, his only real remarkable win is Antonio Silva, who's kind of a borderline top 10 guy. So yeah, I think that's appropriate. I would say more so than I would say this: what's more important than who gets the number 2 or who gets the number 3 slot is the general idea of the stratification. It's the idea that their resumes are fairly comparable based on the recent accomplishments. I would say that's one thing that gets lost in a ranking shuffle sometimes, because rankings, in a way, because it's a number 1 through 10 or 1 through 20 or whatever, it creates the idea that there's even units between rankings. Like, there's the same distance between 1 and 2 as there is for 8 and 9, that kind of thing, or so-and-so's, 5 spots ahead of another fighter. And oftentimes there are fighters whose recent accomplishments are very similar and very comparable. And sometimes there are fighters who are not. For instance, in the welterweight division, George St. Pierre's resume is far ahead of everyone else's. John Fitch and Thiago Alves, their resumes are far ahead of everybody else and beyond that. Now, there's a big drop-off from 1 to 2, and then 2 and 3 to everybody else. Or 185 pounds. Some and Mark Ward have better resumes than everybody other than Anderson Silva by a pretty good margin at this point in time, or 205 pounds even. Lyoto and Rashad have, and Shogun, respectively, those three have done far more than everybody else recently. So oftentimes there are kind of drop-off, and that kind of gets lost. Like, being number 6 on a division ranking doesn't have an inherent value. You don't get X amount of points, or it's not worth anything in particular. It's dependent on your division. I would rather be the 6th lightweight in the world than maybe the 4th best heavyweight in the world, or something of that nature. And that again goes back to something we try to get to with the pound for pound rankings. Like, when we put Gilbert Melendez in there after he beat Shinyaki, it's something that I really kind of argued strongly for and said, look, I know Gilbert Melendez isn't the best lightweight in the world, but it's important that we reward the fact he went out and beat a very good fighter in Shinyaki, whose resume doesn't get the kind of respect it should command. And it's important to kind of get across the fact that being the 3rd best lightweight is still pretty damn good.
Yeah.
Being the 3rd best lightweight, being the 3rd best guy in probably the best division in MMA, I would rather be that at this moment in time than the best flyweight or the best bantamweight or the best heavyweight. So, I mean, when you look at most people's pound for pound rankings, one thing they really want to do is it's like they take every number 1 guy in MMA and they just put them in a line. And it's like, for instance, I think Dominic Cruz is a great guy and might end up being a pound for pound level guy. Dominic Cruz has like 2 big wins in this MMA, and they're at 135 pounds where, there still isn't a whole lot of depth. There's not a lot of hierarchy established. It's not quite like dominating at 170. So like when I see people who have like Dominic Cruz like 5th on their pound for pound list, like, yeah, he's fun to watch, but is that really comparable to John Fitch being like 22-1 in his last 23 fights with the vast majority of them coming in the UFC welterweight division? I don't think so. So that's one thing that I always want to get across when we do, especially with the pound for pound list. Make sure the guys are rewarding. Make sure it's conveying the fact that it's about great competition. And if someone's fighting in a division that is an absolute shark tank, maybe being number 3 is just as good as being number 1 in another division when you consider what really goes into being number 3.
Right on. Well, Jordan, thank you for coming on the show and having a quick little civilized debate with us. And we look forward to having you maybe once again in the future. Thanks a lot, man.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks, guys.
Hey, Jordan, bye.